finishing the Old English tradition of the literative verse and now moving to Middle English literature of the 14th and 15th century. This literature is varied in its forms. We're going to be studying a French tradition associated with some popular genres that become sophisticated called form-fixed poetry. It'd be comparable to an important poet taking on rap music or country music to write a new kind of song, and then that new kind of song, these rap, country, whatever, pop songs that become now utterly sophisticated, become a new poetic genre. We're going to focus on two of these examples. The ballade, not to be confused with the ballad, we always pronounce it as a French word because the ballad and the ballade are different, and the rondeau because they're the most popular. So let's look at the ballade first. The ballade dominates the 14th and 15th century before it's replaced by another medieval genre, the sonnet, and that happens in the 16th century. Now, the ballade is an argumentative genre, just like the sonnet. However, unlike the sonnet, which only has 14 lines, the ballade can be as long as it wants to be, depending on how the author wants to develop the argument or idea, usually or mostly about love. Now, the ballade has three distinct features. Looking at this ballade from William de la Pole, or the Earl of Suffolk, you can see that it has three stanzas, 1, 2, and 3. And the three stanzas are of a uniformed length, sharing the same rhyme pattern. In this case, it's misgouvernance, place, remembrance, space, grâce, procède, dread. This particular rhyme scheme, since the 16th century, is called the rhyme royale. In the Middle Ages, it's identified with Machaut. It's Machaut's favorite rhyme scheme. The third important feature is that each of these stanzas is completed by a refrain. A refrain is like a chorus. That's why it's a popular genre. That's why it's musical. There's repetition. And here we have constrained of heart and steadfast love and dread. This is the refrain. Then it appears again at the end of this stanza, constrained of heart with steadfast love and dread. And then the third one, constrained of heart with steadfast love and dread. This refrain or chorus is an invitation to reflect on the ideas as it's being taken up throughout the ballade from a variety of different angles. The refrain then is being used to reevaluate a central position in the argument from a variety of perspectives. Now, finally, sometimes you find short envoys, usually addressed to the prince. With U6 de Champs et gens qui sont en maladie, we have here a 12-line stanza, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, ending with the refrain, et gens qui sont en maladie, by those who are gripped by a sickness. And then we have announced, it'll always be announced, the l'envoi. You'll always see this as a rubric. And then we have a short 6-line envoy dedicated to the prince. Christine de Pisan's Solet Sui, a very famous ballade, shows its three stanzas beginning with anaphors, Solet Sui, Solet Sui. It's in that rhyme royale. And there is the prince. This is the beginning of the envoy, and that's the end of the envoy. In Chaucer, we have two ballade sequences. Sequences are narrative linking of lyric poems. So in these cases, you have three ballades or three short lyrics put together to tell a story. Both of these sequences end with envoys. Notice that They're announced in French as a l'envoyé, and then it's addressed to the prince. But notice it's spelled in the plural, princes. We know it's in the singular, receiveth this complaint in gray. The prince with the spelling of a S is conventional, coming from French poetry. With Chaucer's, or at least attributed to Chaucer, the Ballade Truth, we see the first two stanzas. It ends with an envoy, but notice here it's not dedicated to the prince, but dedicated to Vache. Vache is a funny name. It is a Sir Philip de la Vache, but also a joke. Vache also means cow. Oftentimes, prince will be substituted with other alternatives, like princess, who I've seen, love, whatever. But prince is the dominant conventional one. The ballade with an envoy is a later development. It's borrowed from another of the form fixes called the Chant Royal, whose 5-stanza poem ends with an envoy addressed to the prince. It was a competitive poem used in rap battles of that period. I guess you call them Chant Royal battles. And the prince is addressed because he's the judge of the poetry competition. The ballade with an envoy is also a sign that medieval lyric is no longer musical. Up to the point where you start to see envoys, the ballade can have musical accompaniment as well. And we're going to look at a ballade by Machaut, and Machaut is the greatest composer of the period. He's also the greatest poet of the period. He's, I don't know, one person in class once said, he's Jay-Z and Beyonce together. He's the best of the best. Machaut's ballads are traditional. They do not have envoys because many of them have musical accompaniment. His ballade, Amours me fait désirer, Love Makes Me Desire, is a perfect example of the way a 14th century ballad or ballade without an envoy looks. Amours me fait désirer et amer, mais c'est si follement que je ne puis espérer, ne penser, n'imaginer nullement. Love makes me desire and love, but so crazily that I cannot hope, nor think, nor imagine at all that the sweet, lovely face that strikes the spark of love must give me joy, if love does not do his work in such a way that I might have her without asking. You can see the development of an idea. Remember, conventional poetry is all about exploring the same idea in new ways. It's always about reworking old ideas. Those are the topoi or the commonplaces. The novelty is how you create a new version of something old, right? That's where the pleasure is. The pleasure is in the variation of that. The refrain works in the same way. The refrain is taking up the same line and altering it. So when you look at the poem, for example, love makes you feel helpless because love is a power, an almost malevolent power. And the refrain of the ballade reinforces that. In one case, it's a declaration. If love does not do his work in such a way that I might have her without asking. In the other case, it becomes fatal realization. And so I have no thought truly that I might have her without asking. And the third case the refrain appears, it implies hope for her agency to transform that problem. I languish without tasting joy, and I will die of it unless soon she agrees that I might have her without asking. Much of this has to do with the fact that love, we think of it as something joyful, but in medieval poetry, it is also a hardship. And the refrain then is adapting to the needs of the argument while reflecting both its pleasures and the bad parts of love, right? The suffering, the sense of isolation. Notice as well how love is treated. He's an allegorical figure. French and Middle English poetry are filled with these allegories. These are personifications or figurative representations of ideas, concepts, or human behaviors. Much of medieval literature is allegoric. We talked about this as well in Old English poetry. Not only is love personified, but also fortune. Now, fortune here is no longer the possible fate that we found with a pagan understanding of the Old English weird or word, but a strictly Latin fortuna, the personification of happenstance, whether resulting in good luck or mishaps. It's the idea that we put faith in a force beyond ourselves, outside of ourselves, that intervenes in our affairs or affects outcomes, good or bad. For example, when you say, uh-oh, I think something bad's gonna happen, you are repeating ideas that are associated with fortune and her wheel. And remember, she always has a wheel, because the wheel shows us good on top, and then we feel the wheel turning. We think, man, I feel something bad's gonna happen. That's the sense of fortune's wheel turning. And then when you're down at the bottom and you're saying, everything can only go up, that's the wheel coming back up again. Now, we find the allegorical figure of fortune in a lot of medieval poems. Take, for example, this example from Machaut, where we face a conflict between fortune and another allegorical figure, nature.
Il m'est avis qu'il n'est dons de nature, comme bons qu'il soit, qui nous prise à ce jour. In my opinion, there is no gift of nature, however good it may be, which anyone values at this time, unless the dark and clouded brightness of fortune gives it color, even though no security is found in her, no love, nor loyalty.
Here, fortune has distorted our ideas about the power of our own natural gifts and abilities. Instead of valuing what's within us, we look externally to the outcomes. In other words, we look externally to fortune, and in that sense, we think of fortune as ruling us. And much poetry about fortune is negative because we lack a proper perspective. But what she offers does not exist.
Goods are only wind and chance, given by mistake and taken away in anger. One must believe her when she swears falsely, for in lying is her greatest honor. She is a monster covered in happiness, full of misfortune. That's obviously antithesis, right? Happiness and misfortune at the same time.
Failure to see this extrinsic description of worth as false brings out another allegorical figure for rebuke. In this case, it's reason. That's your intellect, your ability to think and not be emotional.
And I marvel how reason allows this error to endure so long, for the virtues are in disarray by the vices who reign as lords.
Reason is supposed to give us clarity, a method of thinking, so that we can see how false it is and how irrational it is to hold to fortune as being truly the determinant force in our lives. In a way, this is a sort of self-help poem. Reject irrational beliefs. But here, reason again is a personification. And reason, your reasoning, your thinking, has failed to do his job. Charles is going to take up this very theme of fortune in his ballade sequence, a sequence of 3 ballades we call it Fortune, and we'll talk about that one in the next episode.
Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and ring that notification bell.